let's talk about the worst businesses you can start in 2022 as a beginner. Instead of trying to figure out what the best business is to start, I think it's more important for you to avoid the worst business you can start, because you don't want to invest money and start in something and then realize, oh shit, I just messed up basically. So avoiding it, I think, is also a very crucial part. So in this video, we are going to talk about the worst business you can start in 2022 or any year for that matter. Can you make money from these businesses? Can you succeed at them and completely prove me wrong? Absolutely, of course, no one can tell you otherwise. But I think if you're not experienced in the business game and if you haven't started your own business before, you're in for a surprise, especially if you're trying to do any of these four that I'm going to talk about in this video. Now, obviously, there's 1,000 more businesses we can talk about, and the video would be 2-3 hours long, but let's focus on these four, which covers a broad range of businesses that you may or may not have thought about starting. Now, let's jump into my fancy Google Sheets that I did in my last video. If you haven't watched it, it's about the best business. Check it out up there. And let's talk about those. So we're gonna have the software companies, which is basically providing software to anything. You're just providing a solution to something using software. The other one is a brick and mortar store. Could be selling physical products, having a restaurant, anything that is a physical store. The third one is going to be e-commerce, which is an online store, whether it's a clothing online store, whether it's a dropshipping store. We talked about it in the previous video as well. Whether it is anything, providing an online service. The last one is an in-person service. Basically, it could be anything. For example, I do that, and that is being a close-up magician. I provide a service. You can be a plumber, you can be a car detailer, whatever it is. We're gonna talk about this in this video, and in order to give every one of these a score, we're gonna rank them from 1 to 10, 1 being bad, 10 being good. And this time I added little regulation, and that is because it's gonna make sense. So we have low startup capital, no employees, remote work, high margins, easy to market, little time to make money, recurring revenue, and little regulations. So let's start with software company. This one is, some people decide that I'm gonna be the next Uber, or I'm gonna be the next whatever, but little do they know that you're gonna have to invest a lot of money up front. So is it gonna take, is it low startup capital? No, so we're gonna give it a bad score of 1 in this case, because it's gonna cost you money to hire all these people to do them for you. Otherwise, if you're gonna code it yourself, number one, you're super smart, you're awesome, keep doing it. Number two, it's gonna take a lot of time. So either way, you're gonna have to pay for it upfront. Now, the second one is no employees. You're probably gonna need a couple employees, so let's give this a 4 out of 10. Number 3, remote work. Yes, you can work from anywhere. We'll give this a 10. I freaking love remote jobs because, well, who doesn't? And number 4 is high margins. Does it have high margins? Well, it's going to take you a lot of money for you to build it, but eventually, if it's a good enough product and people buy it, maintaining it would probably not cost you much. So let's give it a 7, because the margins can be pretty big. Basically, margins meaning that the profit you can make from it can be pretty big. Is it easy to market? No, let's give it a 4. Plenty of people trying to create software out there. Not that it's impossible to succeed at it, but there's plenty of people out there doing it. Little time to make money? No, it's going to take you time. So let's give this a 2. Recurring revenue, you can model it in a way where to have access to your software, they have to pay you $1,000 a month. So yeah, it can be recurring revenue if you want to, or it could be an upfront thing. So depending on where you do it, let's give it a 6, because it could be either or. Actually a 5, because it's either or, right in the middle. Little regulations, for the most part, it doesn't require much regulations, and this is based on my limited knowledge, obviously. So let's give this a 8. Now let's jump on to the next one, which is a brick and mortar store. Again, a restaurant, physical clothing store, physical sunglass store, whatever it is. Does it require low startup capital? No, because you're gonna have to pay rent, you're gonna have to design the place, you're gonna have to furnish it, you're gonna have to everything. It's gonna cost you money. So let's give it a 1. No employees. You are most likely going to need employees. So let's give it a 3, because, well, you might run it yourself, or you might have you and your brother do it, or your cousin, or whatever. But for the most part, you're going to need someone with you. Remote work? Nope. I'm going to give this a 0. I can't, unfortunately. Let's give it a 1. It's not remote. You have to be limited to this place specifically for a while before it takes off, and potentially you might even not be able to leave it ever. But anyway, does it have high margins? Depending on what you're selling, let's give it a 5, because you can buy a $1 product and sell it for $100, but at the same time, you are gonna have to pay for rent, you're gonna have to pay for employees, you're gonna have to pay for electricity, all that stuff. So most likely it's not gonna be high margins, obviously depending on what you're selling, but there's a lot of hidden costs associated, or indirect costs. Is it easy to market? Probably, if you have something local, such as a local car wash, and everyone comes to you because you provide the best service. It can be easy. So let's give this a 6. Why not? The word of mouth will spread throughout, depending on how small is where you live in. If you live in New York City, for example, and you're trying to market something, it's going to be very difficult. So I would say this is very location and also very niche dependent, depending on what you're doing and where you're doing. If you're the only watch dealer in New York City, you're gonna have the most business, but obviously there's plenty of them. Now, little time to make money. Well, there's a lot of pre-planning and preparation that goes into you starting your own brick and mortar store or opening your brick and mortar store. So for that reason, it's going to take you some time. Let's give it a 3. And all these are arbitrary, by the way. You could use this formula to literally anything for decision making, or just to compare a few things that you are kind of on the fence about, or you're just confused which one is the best, or in this case, which one is the worst. So does it give you recurring revenue? Maybe. So if you start your own gym, for example, you have recurring revenue. So this also depends on what you're doing. Again, I'm covering a very broad market. I'm not going into specifics because there's plenty of businesses out there. So in this case, let's give it a 5 because it can either be a membership-based business or it could be a one-time thing like a restaurant, for example. Guys, real quick, if you're enjoying this video, please make sure you like it, subscribe, and share it with a friend who can actually benefit from this. Now back to the video. Let's give it a 5. And little regulations. There will be some sort of regulations. So I'm going to give this a 3 because it's not the same as operating a software company or an e-commerce store, in this case from your house. There are regulations that you're going to have to follow based on the city where you're opening, etc. I'm not very familiar with them, but I would assume there's plenty of regulations that come with it. Now, e-commerce, online store, low startup capital. It can be low depending on, that's relative. For some people, low startup capital is 1,000. For some people, it's 10,000. For some people, it's $10. So it depends. But for the most part, depending on what you're starting, it can be expensive, it can be cheap. So let's give it a 5 since it's in the middle. No employees. Does it require employees? Not necessarily. You can have a clothing brand and have all of the inventory with you, and you can fulfill all the orders and all that. Eventually you'll expand, but for now, it doesn't really require employees, especially if you're doing dropshipping, you can run it all the way by yourself. So I'm gonna give this a 8. Probably. Remote work, yes, you can work from anywhere. Again, I love it. High margins, depending on what you're selling, but most likely to start something like that, you will have high margins. So let's give it a 7. Easy to market, nope. Plenty of people having e-commerce stores, so it's going to be super hard. Little time to make money, nope as well. Unless you're the only person who is selling this product, then it's going to be hard. There's always going to be someone who's going to sell it cheaper and better. So basically you guys are going to be racing to zero. So it's not going to take a little time to make. It's going to take time before it gets off the ground. Let's give it a 4. Now, recurring revenue depends on what you're selling. You can sell a monthly based t-shirt subscription where people get t-shirts every month, or you can sell a one-off t-shirt basically. So let's give it a 5 because it depends. Little regulations, yes, doesn't require much regulations. Let's give it a 9. For safety. In-person service, low startup capital, yes, for the most part. It depends. So personally, I just need a deck of cards to perform a whole magic show. So this costs me 10, 15 bucks basically to get a show. But if you are a welder, for example, you weld for a living and you need a lot of equipment to start. Basically, you're going to have to buy the truck, you're going to have to buy all the equipment. So it's going to be expensive. So let's give it a 5 because it definitely depends on the service. No employees. I don't need employees, but some other services need employees. Let's give it a 5 as well because it's either or. Again, the reason why this is happening is because it's very broad and it can go really either or. Because if I say you don't need employees, someone's going to tell me, well, I run a car wash service and I need 5 people with. So it all depends. Can you do remote work? No, because, well, it's in person. So it's no remote work. Does it have high margins? Yes, potentially. But as I said, it depends on what you're doing. But for the most part, for example, in the USA, labor overall and just working with your hands gets you paid a good amount of money. For example, plumbers make good money. Electricians make really good money. So these services do make money. So there is high margins, I would say. Let's give it a 8. Easy to market. It depends as well. But let's say in my case, as a magician, there's not many magicians in my area. So it kind of can be like a monopoly because I'm competing with, let's say, 10 others. So it could be easier to market, especially if you have a good product out there. So this is one of the easier ones because if it's an in-person service, for the most part, you are going to be doing it locally. I would say 99% of people would do it locally. So eventually word will spread if you are good enough and if what you're providing is good. So let's give it a 7. Little time to make money. Yes, anyone can start making money instantly because usually if you're providing an in-person service, you are technically good at something which you are providing the service in. So if you're a tutor and you tutor math, you already know how to teach math. So basically you can start right now and get paid instantly. So I'll give it this a 9 because you can get paid very quickly. Recurring revenue, it also depends. You can be a personal trainer, for example, and get paid monthly $400 to go to this certain client. So it can be recurring. For me as a magician. It's a one-off thing. I just do one show and that's it for the most part. So again, it's a 5. Does it have little regulations? I'm gonna give this a 5 because it depends on what you are trying to do as well. Some of the things require way more regulations. Some things, like my case, barely requires any regulations. So let's keep it a 5. Now let's add these together. This is a 41. This is gonna be a 27. This is going to be a 51, and this one is going to be a 45. Can you guess which one's the worst? It's a brick and mortar store. So I'm pretty sure you guys guessed it already, but this is a nice way to quantify why it's not the best idea to start it. Now, as I said in the beginning of the video, can you actually make money and succeed at it and make a killing? Absolutely. I don't see why not. But if you're someone who's not experienced and you don't have much startup capital to begin with, and you want to work remotely and you don't want to be placed in one certain demographic or one location because you just like taking 5 vacations a year, then probably in this case, e-commerce is the best solution. Or in this case, it's best to just avoid a brick and mortar store to begin with, unless you have a dream of opening a restaurant and this is what you want, then who am I to tell you otherwise?